Good morning, and welcome to the Lotus Project workshop supporting AAPI communities and healing from racial trauma, addressing barriers and building bridges. Thank you so much for being here. I wish I could be there with you all. It looks like you all have a phenomenal day ahead of many fantastic trainers and speakers to discuss many important things related to behavioral health, mental health in AAPI communities. A little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Won-Fong Lau Johnson. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and nationally certified school psychologist, and I am the assistant director for the service systems program here at the UCLA Duke National Center for Child Traumatic Stress. So it's a really exciting role. Our job is as a Category 1 funded site with SAMHSA is to be the coordinating body for our Category 2 and Category 3 SAMHSA funded sites. We collectively have a mission to ensure we are providing high quality care for our children and families who have been impacted by trauma. One of the really exciting things about the Lotus Project, in collaboration with the Public Health Institute and RAMS, is it's one of our few sites that are really focused on addressing AAPI mental health. And I will say, from a national perspective, we have a real lack of, unfortunately, a real lack of mental health resources, and I think with the general public, a real lack of understanding of what our AAPI communities need. So, we reference AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander. It's also been referenced as AAAI, Asian American and Asian Immigrant Communities. And so one thing to point out, many of you probably know, there's over 50 distinct ethnic categories within that large umbrella, which is really what the government has kind of labeled in order to kind of count, the census, the population numbers. One thing to note is that our population is growing at a pretty high rate in our country, in the United States. And I think even it speaks even more to the need to address what is going on in our communities as it relates to mental health and our services. So one of the things I wanted to share with you all is a little bit more about myself and kind of go a bit into what our numbers say as a nation. So my parents are immigrant from Hong Kong, and we really struggled with navigating the westernized healthcare system, education system, multiple systems in our country. And one of the things I wanted to share with you all is, so I have a hearing impairment, so I wear hearing aids in both ears. And it's pretty notable because my mom, who, I think some people would describe as a tiger mom, which she kind of was, I'm not gonna lie, but she really advocated for me in the education system. We grew up in a town called Lompoc, California, which is by Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is where my father was stationed in the Air Force. And we were one of very, very few Asian families in Lompoc. I think at my high school, there's the demographic was 0.01% Asian. Um, and so I'm mentioning this because I was almost placed in the wrong education classroom. I was almost placed in the severely handicapped classroom because of my hearing. My mom really had to fight to ensure that I was placed in the right education classroom. Her English was good, but she was often, stereotyped and assumed to be less than given her accent and just trying to get their footing here in this country. So I'm saying all this because this story may be familiar to some of you in some shape or form, and it's something that I think really impacted how I saw the world, my perspective, and why I became so interested in mental health, because it was something that I don't feel like we talked about enough in our family, just the struggle, the stress, the impact it was having on our bodies. And the older I got and the increased interest I started to have in psychology, it became painfully obvious that there were even less of us in the field of behavioral health. There's not a ton of AAPI therapists. There's not a ton of AAPI folks in the field of mental health either. So if we're looking at the numbers, it is about 80 to 85% white in terms of providers. And then they break down the other 15% as BIPOC. And if you look at those numbers of BIPOC providers, AAPI specifically has a pretty small percentage of representation in the field. And I think this is absolutely critical as we're thinking about, as you guys talk about through this day, what are the barriers to access to care? What are the barriers to having connection with providers when there's so few of us? And so I'm excited for you all to step into those conversations. We also know from the research that we're seeing young people, adolescents. There was a study done by Yoon and their colleagues in 2017, where they looked at what are mental health outcomes for Asian American adolescents. And what they found was that the higher acculturation among Asian American adolescents, the more positive health outcomes. However, the lower their acculturation, but higher inculturation, which is a retention of your culture of origin, they became actually more at risk for negative mental health outcomes. And I thought these findings were particularly important and interesting because, I feel like I related to this and how much are our kids, our young people losing their culture with the desire to really acculturate to the majority. And what does that mean for their mental health and how they shape into adults? And so I think there's a ton of research out there around acculturation, inculturation, the impact of, you know, immigrant families, but there's a lot less work done around how are we actually reaching AAPI community in order to do good work with them to ensure that we're helping them feel included, that their culture is celebrated, that they're being empowered to have racial ethnic pride in who they are. And so, that's kind of one piece of something that's kind of happening on a national scale, and that's been pretty consistent before COVID-19. And I'm saying COVID-19 because since COVID-19, we've seen this horrific increase. In fact, I think a recent report as of February of 2022 anyway, was that anti-Asian hate crimes had increased 339% nationwide. 339%. That is an astronomical number, and that doesn't even account for folks who are not reporting. And so, the question, how has anti-Asian hate and discrimination affected young people, our families? Well, I would say a great deal. And I think that we need to figure out a way to address it head on. We need to name it, we need to acknowledge it, and we need to equip providers across the nation to really have these conversations. One of the resources that I've been fortunate to work with the Lotus Project, PHI, and RAMS, we created this brief, which I think is on the tables out there, the rise of anti-Asian and Pacific Islander hate. And we really felt it important to really look at historically, how did we get here as a nation? And unfortunately, violence and hate towards AAPI communities is not new. And so one of the things that I think would be really helpful is for you all to take some time to take a look at this brief. And I can just do a quick share here. As you can see, we reported the numbers from Stop AAPI Hate. And then we go through historically what's been going on in our history in terms of historical events, because nothing happened in a vacuum. And we see how the culmination of all of these events contribute to the historical trauma that we feel in our community that still impact us to this day. It shows up in our bodies, it shows up in how we think and how we see ourselves, and how much we feel like we have a right to have racial ethnic pride in ourselves. And so we are seeing the impact in our young people as well. We also have another resource coming out very soon. I'll give a really quick sneak peek. It's not quite published yet, but it's talking with youth about anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander hate. So that is to come very, very soon. And so, ultimately, I want to say it's so incredibly important to build solidarity and coalition among all ethnic and racial minority communities to address racism and its harm. One of the things to note is if you take a look at that brief and that historical brief, and if any of you remember, for example, the LA riots. And if you take a closer look at that historical event, that's a perfect example of white supremacy culture, a media that is dominated by white supremacy culture, kind of holding the narrative. In what they did with the LA riot, they really pit the Korean American community against the Black and African American community at that time. And that's not a new story, unfortunately. And we actually saw that again in COVID-19. What the media was reporting as who the perpetrators was of committing the violence towards AAPI community, they would often display Black men or Latino men as really being the perpetrators of violence, when in fact, if we broke down the statistic, it was mainly white males. So I'm mentioning this because this is just one, unfortunately, of many examples of how the media can divide us, but not just the media, but just white supremacy culture divide ethnic and racial groups when we don't hear enough of the solidarity that has been built across us. And so I think it's so important that we really understand AAPI history, community, our needs, address it, and also build solidarity across the group. And so I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for being here. I'm just so excited for you all to enter and step into this day. And, just want to, again, extend my gratitude to you all for doing this really incredibly important work. Thank you so much.